Welcome to the Black Magic Woman Podcast with Mandanara Bales.
When you look at our mob, everyone thought we were just going to die out, but we haven't.
Probably the most adaptable people on the planet.
It's this emergence of this humanality again that I find so enriching.
Be wise, be wise, be wise. Look at ways to cost save so that at the end of the day, your door's still open.
I'd like to begin this podcast by acknowledging the Gubbi Gubbi people, the traditional owners of the land of where I am today, and also acknowledge their elders past and present. I'd also like to extend that acknowledgement of traditional owners right across this country, from wherever this podcast has been listened to, and also right across the world. For today's podcast, we've been joined by Troy Casey and Amanda Hayman, two deadly black fellas who started a deadly business, Blaklash Creative. So welcome to the show, Amanda and Troy. Before we get into Blaklash Creative, and whoever wants to start first, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, who your mob, where you grew up, and so on.
Hey, Mandanara, it's Amanda Hayman. I grew up in Logan City, and I have cultural connections to Kalkadoon and Waka Waka country.
Too deadly. And what about you, Troy?
Yeah, Troy Casey. I grew up in Brisbane on the north side, but my mob's from Kamilaroi country, so northwest New South Wales, southwest Queensland.
Too deadly. And, when I think about, the first question, who are you, and where your mob's from, let's dig a little bit deeper. I'll start with you, Amanda, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
So where did you actually grow up, and can you take us back to, I guess, your younger years? Not that you're old, my sister, but just take us through. I guess for listeners that know a lot about you, Amanda, whether it was from the Coral Dargan days with the State Library, you was the manager there for at least 10 years, and that's how we basically connected and built our relationship. And you've done many other things, but if we put your CV aside and your work achievements aside, tell us about Amanda Hayman.
Yeah, I grew up in Logan, as I mentioned. I have one brother and three sisters, so a family of five. And I went to Maple Park, primary school, high school, but moved around the Logan area growing up.
Well, what was it like? What was it like growing up in Logan? Are you going back at least, 10, 15 years ago? What was life like as a black fella growing up in Logan? Yeah,
there was heaps of black fellas around. My school, we had a real sense of community growing up. I guess I didn't learn about culture really in my household, so all the kind of cultural knowledge and kind of learnings that I did in my younger years was from community. And we had a beautiful kind of CEC, community education counsellor at primary school and high school, and we had a really good support unit at school. I was part of the ASPA committee at that time, so that was the Indigenous kind of group that gets together, and we had funding at that time and for Indigenous students, and we got to kind of talk about how we wanted to spend the money, and we do cultural camps and activities and workshops and that kind of thing. I was always involved in the kind of extracurricular activities around our school. I did the ATAP challenge. I don't know.
Did you do ATAP as well?
I did ATAP from grade 8 to grade 12. So
do you remember going out to, was it Nudgee College where they held it?
Yeah, I was there.
Oh, my goodness. I don't know if you remember this, but in the big hall where we did a lot of the big gatherings, right?
Yeah.
There was a big banner, and that's where the administration people were set up doing things. But in that big hall, there was this really big banner, which was the ATAP banner, and it was huge. And it had my face on it.
Shut up.
So there you go.
I knew you looked familiar when we met. For those that don't know, ATAP stood for Aboriginal and Islander Tertiary Aspirations Program.
And wasn't it deadly? Like some of the things that we did is there were schools from all around Queensland, right? I remember some of the private schools. St. Augustine's. Do you remember St. Augustine's?
They were always the best, hey?
They killed it in everything, right? But you would do like scenarios and you'd have to come up with a skit and you'd have to perform in front of people.
Yeah. Well,
and at the time it was real shame, but same time how everyone connected and enjoyed it and looked forward to seeing each other, the next day. And I remember those days.
Yeah, it was amazing. Like if we could recreate that for young people today, it would be so amazing. That really kind of shaped my identity, not just the challenge itself, but leading up to the challenge, you had to do so much research and you had to come up with different things. Yeah, and I think when I was...
I hear little Charlie there in the background, Amanda.
Yeah, Charlie's here.
You're a new mum?
Running amok, yeah.
How old's Charlie?
Charlie is just over 3 months now.
Oh, how beautiful. I said to you before, Amanda, I said, you know what? If we hear Charlie screaming out for mum or dad's help or attention, and that's all good, because I think our listeners need to know, especially as a small Aboriginal business, not small, but, definitely not a huge business.
Yeah.
Multitasking and being a mum and looking after Charlie and running your business and doing a podcast with me.
Yeah.
Well, Mandanara, we know about your multitasking. I think I've sat in about 2 or 3 workshops where Tiger Lily's been the centre of attention.
Yeah.
You know what I always think about, when I think about some of my own achievements in business and even in my life. Do you know what? I reflect on the fact that I was able to bring Tiger Lily to hundreds of either meetings or workshops or lectures at universities. But she had done over 200 flights. She had travelled with me at least 200 times before her 3rd birthday.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So, and to run a business and to take my baby with me is definitely one of my highlights. So Amanda and Troy, in terms of, raising a small child now and having your own family, we just adapt, and they adapt to things as well, right?
Totally. I mean, in this current climate at the moment, Charlie's been on about 7 Zoom calls in the last 24 hours. And he seems
he's zoomed out. He's zoomed out.
He seems to be adapting really well, actually, Mandanara, to that.
I love it. And it's just amazing that, with the Black Magic Woman podcast, what I really wanted to do and my focus was like, instead of talking about what we do, because we do it all the time, we're in business, we're forever talking about what we do, especially when we're meeting potential clients or we're writing up proposals or tender documents. But very rarely do we get to talk about who we are, and what makes us human, and hopefully seeing what connects us, what are our commonalities, I actually love the fact that Annie Lilla talks about these introductions that we do at Black Card is when we introduce ourselves based on Aboriginal terms of reference is what we're doing today. We're talking about who we are and where we grew up and some of those stories from our childhood and so on. But when we share those stories with each other, it reinforces our humanness. Mm. And I think that's really important that we focus on that, especially given the current climate, as you mentioned, Troy, with COVID-19. Mm. So much going on in the world. But before we get to what's going on now, Troy, talk to me, and thank you, Amanda, for sharing that. I've just learnt something else about you that's connected us again on another level, so thank you, my sister.
You're welcome.
So which way with you, Troy? Tell us a little bit about your journey
Yeah, totally. I guess so. Mine's a little different to Amanda's. Like many of our stories, mine is affected, I guess, by stolen generation. My mum was adopted at birth. My grandma got pregnant at 14 years old and had my mum at 15. Ran away from the mission. From northern New South Wales and came to Brisbane to have my mum and put her up for adoption straight away, and then kind of left and got on with her life. And I guess the interesting thing about it is, on my mum's birth certificate there was never any information about her Aboriginality. So, there was the name of her mum, but that was it. And my mum tried to find her, in her late 20s. My mum had me when she was 20, so when I was quite young. And in her early 30s, she reconnected with her mother through Link Up. So it was actually Uncle Ross Watson who kept saying to my mum, because they're family through adoption, he kept saying to my mum, go to Link Up. Like, you're a black fella. Like, have a look at yourself in the mirror. Like, go to Link Up. They'll find your family. And so
what is Link Up, Troy, for listeners that don't know, never heard of Link Up?
Yeah, in Queensland, it's an organisation that basically reconnects family members that have been lost through stolen generations, separation of families, I guess from the breakdown of colonialism on our communities, particularly on the East Coast and in Queensland, had the worst kind of policies in place. It tries to reconnect family members who have lost each other through those forced separations. So, Uncle Ross was right on it. I mean, my mum rung up Link Up, and within 2 months she'd found her mum, like it was like, the Murray grapevine worked stupendously on that one. So, I found out about my Aboriginality when I was like 12 or 13 years old, which was...
Do you remember those moments, Troy, in your life?
I do. I really do. So my grandma rung my mum on Christmas Day, which was really, it's like, the fairy tale kind of thing for my mum and my grandma to reconnect. And then, one of they were having a conversation. Obviously, one of the first things that, my mum wanted to know, because I think she struggled with her identity. She got called all those names when she was growing up, but couldn't actually say she was. You know what I mean? There was this weird, kind of racist slurs that she would get, but she kind of wasn't connected to her culture. So it was like this really weird identity crisis, I guess.
What would have been unfair, because she's been kind of targeted and discriminated against and treated differently. Yeah,
and she doesn't know why it's different,
No, exactly.
Yeah, and so I guess, my mum really wanted, I guess some answers, some clarity around that, and, and then I guess that's when my journey began in terms of, identifying as Aboriginal and starting to learn more about who I am as a person and my own cultural connections back to country. So, and it's been a slow burn, I think, through high school, it was really hard for me, like being 13, going through puberty, kind of, trying to understand who I am as a person, not looking Aboriginal. So how do I say it now when I never have before? So it's really, it's the same kind of thing that my mum went through, I guess, but with a different kind of lens. It's like, am I black enough to be Aboriginal, and what are people going to say when I start to identify? I think university was probably where I felt the most comfortable, at the Oodgeroo unit at QUT. And that's kind of, I think those spaces create safe places for you to, and you kind of see other black fellas there that look like you, and so you feel a bit more confident.
So you don't feel so out of place, right?
Totally, when I went and met up with my family when I was like 14 years old, I think, so it took a while for us to kind of reconnect with our family unit. Like, they're all like black fellas, you know, like super dark.
Yep,
and, like,
grew up on the mission.
And I'm like, holy shit, like, hang on, how do I fit in this mix, you know? Like,
being a fair-skinned black fella
Totally.
and looking at all your mob that are all different shades of white, brown and black and all in between.
Yeah. But then I think you see, you know, when I saw some of my other cousins that were the same, you know, complexion as me, and you start to feel a bit like, hang on, no, it is okay. And I'm proud of who I am, regardless of that history, you know. Unfortunately, I didn't get to grow up with that connection until I was, you know, mid-teens. But since then, I've been strong in who I am, strong in, you know, the community that I represent and my family that I represent, and also, I guess, the communities that we now live in and work in. You know, it's about being, if you know who you are and who your family is and where you come from, that's the most important thing about being a black fella.
Nothing else matters,
Correct,
right?
because we all have had different experiences and we've all had different opportunities to be able to reconnect back on country and things like that. But, you know,
and some haven't, but who are we to judge, right?
Well, totally. Like, you know, and some haven't for, like, extremely traumatic reasons. Like, you know,
Exactly.
families don't talk anymore, or they've been removed from country, and, you know, they don't have any family back on country that they can reconnect with.
Yep, too many generations have passed. People have passed away.
Totally.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, some of the things that I've grown dramatically over have been when I have had opportunities to reconnect on country with traditional owners, whether it's my own country or whether it's someone else's, is understanding the way in which our systems used to operate. You know, really complex kinship systems used to operate, but like how our, you know, elders continue to teach us around, like Aunt Lilla says, Aboriginal terms of reference, and getting to know people before you do anything more, you know, with them. Like, it's about connection and relationships.
Definitely. And, you know, for people that are listening to the podcast, hearing the term black fellas, right? And it's good for us to talk about this because Aboriginal peoples across this country use this word. I think it's safe to say it's common language amongst us to identify as black fellas. And it's definitely got nothing to do with skin colour, right? It's, for me, it's how we live our lives that define us as black fellas.
Yeah, so true, Mondanara.
And, you know, I've got a little sister, Troy and Amanda, who has blonde hair, blue eyes.
Yeah.
And fair skin. Her name's Jida Bale. So if you're listening, my sister, hello. And I had a little boy, and my husband's, you know, a Fijian and very dark skin. And we had this little boy, and he was really, really white with blue eyes. And for the first kind of 9 months, I just couldn't get my head around it. And, you know, people would look at us in a shopping centre with my husband really dark, holding this white as a ghost baby. And I'm talking about his skin colour was like a porcelain doll. It was like white as his beanie.
Yeah.
And a beautiful. And the features were, you know, you could tell this kid was a black fella, right? But talking about identity, Trent, I think it's really important. It's a really important topic of conversation for all of us.
Yeah.
My little fella, Jida, I named him after my little sister because they look like each other. And now they are to a T in terms of their personalities. She was a hardhead growing up. Out of 8 daughters, it was her that tested my father. And Jida is you know, the second youngest in our family between Peace and I, and he really tests Peace a lot. So they're spitting image, and all my family say to me, "Oh, well, you caught him, Jida." But at about 2.5, 3 years old, I still remember the conversation. He said to me, he wasn't 3, he was still 2, and he said to me, he said, "Mummy," and he pointed to his skin, to his arm, and he said to me, "Mummy, I'm a Miglu." And I said, "A Miglu?" Because for people that don't know the terminology, Miglu is like white or ghostly featured. So people have heard or seen Migloo, the white whale. That's an Aboriginal word. So anyways, my little fella said to me, Mummy, I'm a Migloo, and pointed to the colour of his skin. And I said, no, you're a Murray. And he says, no, I'm a Migloo. And I said, listen, my darling, we're all Murrays in this house. You're Murray. I'm a black fella and you're a black fella. And he said, no, I'm not a black fella. And at that moment, as a parent of a child who right then and there was clearly having or going through an identity crisis before his 3rd birthday, it really hit me. And I remember crying because I just didn't know how to talk to him about identity as a 2.5-year-old. I wasn't even prepared to talk to my 2.5-year-old about identity, but everyone around him in the household had darker skin. Yeah. All the other kids were quite dark, and he already felt out of place. Different, yeah. And yeah, it was really hard for me. And so yeah, I think it's a really interesting conversation when I hear other black fellas talking about identity, and it just brings me to a book that I read recently by Anita Heiss, Growing Up Aboriginal in Australia, and reading all of these other black fellas' accounts and experiences of what it was like growing up in this country as a black fella. Have you read that book?
Yeah, I have. I got it.
Troy, it's a must read. I think in the last 7 years of running my business, it's been really hard to find time to read. Yeah. And it's the first book in 7 years that I've read from the start to the end, and I did it in about a week. Yeah, cool. And you'd think on all those planes, right, I'd be reading, and all those hotel rooms I'd be reading, but no. Can't find time to read. But now's the perfect time to start reading books. Totally. And that's one book that I would recommend. So back to, university days and the Udjuru unit and finding a safer place where you could start to, I guess, to process what it means to be a black fella and to be able to be around other black fellas that kind of resembled yourself. What happened after the university days? Where did you end up after university, Troy?
I actually went I travelled overseas for a couple of years. I spent 2 years after I finished university. I worked a couple of jobs and went to uni and saved up a good amount of money and went and travelled overseas. I'd always wanted to do a kind of gap year or a bit of travel, and I travelled and worked for just under 2 years and went to 34 different countries. Yeah, and just kind of tried to get the travel bug out of my system before I came back to Australia for work, really. And then that's when I guess my professional career started. And
well, before we get into that, tell me, what was one of your most memorable countries in it? 34 countries.
I really liked, that's pretty hard, hey. South America was probably, I wouldn't say there's a particular country, but I think South America was probably my favourite just because of the diversities of different, in between different countries. And also the First Nations people of each of those countries were so prominent and easily, it was easy to connect with them through travel. Whereas here in Australia, it's a bit more challenging, I think, for tourists to connect with blackfellas. But over in South America, it was just so nice to connect with other First Nations mob and, delve a bit deeper into what their culture is all about and some of their, cultural traditions and protocols and things like that. So I think, South America for sure.
When I think about being, what I was going to add to that, Troy, is that, when people come to Australia and they want to experience the Aboriginal culture in this country, because we are the oldest continuous surviving culture on the planet, right? Totally. And people are studying us in terms of anthropologists, but we're still here. But I guess the biggest myth is that people think that blackfellas are are out in the outback. Like you've got to go to places as far as Uluru and remote places in this country to actually meet an Aboriginal person, when in fact we all know that, at least 75% of the Indigenous population in this country live in urban and regional cities and settings. So you don't have to go as far as Uluru, people. We're everyday people.
There are some tours around South Brisbane that I know of that are pretty good, Bundanara.
Oh, well, look out. You're going to have to tell our listeners about that.
Yeah, Blackcard do an amazing array of different cultural tours and tell Aboriginal perspectives through the lens of art and stories that are connected through artworks throughout the cultural precinct. So if you haven't already, get across to Blackcard Cultural Tours and book one in once this COVID finishes.
Well, thank you so much for giving our little. I wouldn't say it is a business, right? Because we have tried for the last couple of years to kick that cultural tours business off so that it is, it's a standalone product and it's market ready, and hopefully people from all around the world and the big cruise ships and all of that know of Blackcard Cultural Tours a year and 2 years in advance. So we are getting there. But, when I think about the work that we were doing in that kind of cultural tour space, it brings me back to the work that you and Amanda have been doing with Blaklash Creative. So why don't we talk about business? What kind of brought you two together? Whether you want to talk about in a personal sense or in a professional sense. Talk about how did you two fellas get together?
Well, we first met when I was still working at the State Library. Troy came in wanting to book a venue space for an event, a business event that he was running. So, it was
and the rest is history.
Yeah.
No.
It's funny that we hadn't crossed paths before, but
because Brisbane is so small, right?
Yeah.
And the black community is even smaller.
Yeah.
So isn't that interesting that you had never crossed paths before?
No.
Until this, handsome looking man walks into Corodagan wanting to book a space for an event. And which way? So you basically, obviously, had a few conversations and you decided that you were interested in each other. But in terms of, but then how did you end up in business together?
Yeah,
I've never asked you this, and we're quite close and connected.
Yeah, totally. I guess what led to us kind of getting into business together was the fact that we had really similar interests in the creative industries and the way in which kind of visual arts and cultural events and festivals kind of can connect the wider community with our stories and culture. And we both have quite different skill sets and quite unique skill sets in terms of, for me, it's more about kind of business acumen and entrepreneurship, and Amanda is, and I guess we both share a skill set in event management and project management. And Amanda kind of really introduced me to the visual arts scene when we first met by starting to go into openings and exhibitions. And again, it's weird, this recurring thing about feeling safe in certain places and accepted. So, in the visual arts industry, when I went to my first opening with Amanda, I was like, oh, whoa, I don't know if this is am I smart enough? I don't understand the art on the wall. What's going on here? It was really, different. But then I learned, everything else, art is subjective, you can, and I guess art is such a beautiful way to connect people with some of the more serious stories about Aboriginal history in this culture, in this country too. Mm-hmm. And I guess we're always being asked to jump on projects with people or help, deliver things when we had full-time jobs, and we couldn't, and the Com Games came around, and we got offered to do about 4 or 5 different projects for the Commonwealth Games, and we were like, maybe this is our chance to do our own thing. And from then, we literally have not been out of work or had to advertise or put in a grant or do anything. We've just delivered quality projects, high quality outputs, word of mouth, and, we continue to keep getting contract after contract, which is really, it's amazing.
Which is a testament to all of your hard work, especially for you, Amanda. You've been in this game for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, I went to university and studied contemporary art, and then I was a freelance artist for about 3 years, and then I was offered that amazing job with Coral Dargan at the State Library, which kind of put all my interests, because I was working with community, and I was also able to be creative. Most of the time I was looking after the exhibitions in the space. So, it was just a dream job for me at the time.
Mm-hmm. And with Blaklash Collective, there's a few different things that you guys do. And one of them is, I guess I want to share with listeners, because every time I wear my Black Flag T-shirt, or if I wear my House of Dizzy earrings, I've now got the Black Flag tote bags, the few little things that I pick up as a regular to your shop in West End. How did the open house kind of collective come into being? Because I think it's really important for listeners to know that other than the cultural events and the different, would you say the art exhibitions that you fellas run?
Yeah.
That open house collective is an opportunity for you fellas to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in business, right?
Yeah. So when Troy mentioned that we got a fair few contracts from the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games, we had a contract for the Meanjin markets. So we ran the first 2 Meanjin market events, which is a 2-day festival, and just had around 20 to 30 different Indigenous businesses that would set up their shops in the Brisbane CBD and just have a cultural event to help sell their wares. And I guess we built relationships with a lot of these really amazing businesses that we really wanted to continue to support. So we probably a year later, from the first Meanjin markets, we opened Open House, and that's a collaborative space in West End. We look after Indigenous businesses and sell art and products in the space, along with a couple of friends of ours who put together local makers. So ceramics and jewellery and fashion from local businesses in Brisbane. So non-Indigenous businesses are in the space also, and we've got vintage clothing. So Box Vintage is in that space as well. So it's really beautiful collaboration with both Indigenous and non-Indigenous products in the one space.
But I think it's important to also mention that, I think when you're doing the right thing, like karma and all those things that kind of fall into place. Like this open house was an opportunity where, a mate of ours rang us up and said, hey, I've got, a shop next door that I'm looking at leasing, but I think let's just put our heads together and think about something cool that we can do. And it kind of all just fell into place. I mean, we started we were like, yeah, this sounds cool. There's an office space at the back. We'll take that. And then we might throw on some art exhibitions and sell some blackfella products. And we started with 4 businesses that we were supporting by selling their wares in our store. the other day we just did a stock take of all of the products that we have. And since we've started, we've supported over 54 different Indigenous businesses, artists or art centres to sell products in Brisbane CBD. So, I think that trajectory of where that's going is really positive. And as you say, if I think a lot of blackfellas, if they had $1 for every time they said, oh, where can I get this? And people have said, oh, go to Open House. There'd be a lot of rich blackfellas out there. But, we just try and stock what's on trend at the moment, what all blackfellas want to buy. We know what those products are. And then also at the moment, it's really important to kind of support all Aboriginal businesses, but also, art centres at the moment who are going to be affected as well by this COVID stuff also.
Of course, what a great point to mention, because when you think about supporting the Indigenous business sector, you fellas have been doing it for quite some time with that shop front down at West End called Open House. So in terms of, I guess, what's on the radar, what's on your agenda, can you share anything with our listeners, what you fellas are up to?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think just the first thing that comes to mind is at the moment we've had a lot of things cancelled because of COVID-19. I mean, we were going to be working with Quandamooka Mob for Quandamooka Festival, which has been postponed till next year. We've also got an upcoming exhibition with Proper Now Collective, which is the leading Aboriginal arts collective in this country. So the likes of like Richie Bell, Tony Albert, Vernon Arkey, Gordon Hookey, Jennifer Hurd, Megan Cope, and Laurie Nilsson, bless, who just passed recently. That's a major exhibition that's happening at UQ Art Museum. Not 100% sure of the date just yet. But the other thing, and building off what we were talking about in Open House, Amanda and I have started a new company, which we started last year, called Aboriginal Art Co. It's a profit-for-purpose organisation which is about connecting consumers with authentic and ethically sourced Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art and products. So it's the next version of what Open House is, but this will be an entirely all Aboriginal products, art, bar and dining. Kind of, we've got really big visions for what that will be.
Oh, look out.
Here in Brisbane, yeah.
Too deadly. And at a time like this, Amanda and Troy, is there anything you want to say to some of our listeners, especially when you think about maybe people from corporate Australia and our different local and state and even federal government people that, have done business with Indigenous businesses or are looking to do business with Indigenous businesses? Is there any words of advice or anything you want to share with people before we wrap up?
Yeah, I'll say something. Amanda's pointing at me.
Now's your opportunity, my brother.
Look, I think one of the biggest things that we have grown to overcome since starting our business is the trust factor with corporates and government organisations who are wanting to, starting to engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses. We have the capacity, we have the skills. We've worked inside all of your organisations previously and been employed by you to deliver projects, and now we're doing it out externally. I think there just needs to be this understanding that Aboriginal businesses are just businesses that are run by Aboriginal people. They're not this, something that you need to give a handout to, or something that, yes, there might be a metric in your organisation around, spend for an Indigenous procurement policy, but also just engage us because we're the best at doing what it is that we do. I said before that we've never advertised, we've never put in for a grant. We've always just got contracts off the back end of providing quality outputs and outcomes. And it's like any business. If you do a good job, you'll get more work. If you don't do a good job, you won't get any more work. So, it's about just checking out those businesses, checking out their track record and or the owner's track record, because they might be new to business, but, they might have been inside an organization that has a portfolio of, a couple of $100 million, and now they're, some government organizations are struggling to sign them over on a $200,000 contract, So I think there's a big thing about trust and about believing in our capacity. Like if we're going to apply for a job, we know that we can do it.
Definitely.
Yeah. So give us a go if you haven't already. And also those new businesses, it's really hard at the moment, but it's going to come back. But I think, there's a lot of businesses that have the capability, have capacity that just haven't been given a crack yet. And, how do you build capability and capacity if you don't get those opportunities?
Absolutely love, how we've kind of ended, our yarn, or we've come to an end. And I just want to say that it's been an absolute pleasure to yarn with both of you. And I know there's a lot going on in your world at the moment, especially with raising, young Charlie. How do people get in contact with you fellas?
So Instagram, Facebook, Blaklash projects. Yeah, email us. However, I guess it's just the online world is pretty easy to connect with us. I'm guessing Mundanara will tag us in the post on this on this podcast. But yeah, reach out. We're always open for a yarn, whether it's someone new in business who wants to talk to someone in the creative industries, or whether it's a corporate who's got an idea for a project. Like, we're always open.
If you go onto our website, blaklash.com, you can subscribe to our newsletter as well.
Too deadly, Amanda. I knew you was going to throw that one in. So
well done, Mandy.
I just want to say it's been an absolute pleasure yarning with you, and to actually just see you fellas grow from strength to strength. And like you said, Troy, we'll get through this. And, a quote that I took from this podcast, and I wrote it down, you said, Troy, that we have the capacity. We have the skills. We've worked in your organisations. We know how to do business. So on that note, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us on Black Magic Woman, and I look forward to catching up with you in the near future. So thank you.
Definitely. Thank you, Mundanara. Appreciate it, and good luck with the rest of the podcast. They're deadly so far, so keep them coming for us.
No worries at all. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Okay.
See you.
Bye.
And that was the deadly duo, Blaklash Collective, Amanda Hayman and Troy Casey. An amazing business in Brisbane where they're curating positive experiences that celebrate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community and culture through all sorts of mediums. On my next episode, I'll be joined by Yarrika Bales, a mother, our auntie, a grandmother, a tour guide, black card facilitator, an amazing chef, alongside Rebecca Hack, who has 25 years of teaching and school leadership experience. Rebecca is now with the Queensland Teachers Union, a former school principal from Rockhampton, and we yarn about all things education, culture, the union, but more importantly, the work that Black Card and QTU are doing here in Queensland. If you've enjoyed listening to the Black Magic Woman podcast, go and review and rate the podcast at the Apple Store. We're on social media. You can go to Black Magic Woman podcast on Instagram and also on Facebook. Thanks so much for your company. Until next time, take care.